70 days. That is how long parts of this country have been living above normal. Not a little above normal. Not the kind of above normal where you open the window at night and it cools off just enough to sleep. I mean the kind of above normal where your power bill arrives and you sit down for a moment before opening it. The kind of above normal where you stopped asking when it would break and started wondering whether it would break at all. And now September is 1 week away. Here is what I need you to understand before anything else in this video. This is not the same heat story we have been telling since June. Something changed in the atmosphere over the last 3 weeks. The models are catching it. The data coming out of the International Research Institute at Columbia University is catching it. NOAA's own August update confirms it. And tonight I'm going to walk you through exactly what is happening, why your area may not get the relief you're counting on, what the day-by-day picture looks like through Labor Day weekend and beyond, and what the rest of September actually looks like once you factor in what El Nino's doing right now in the equatorial Pacific. This is going to take some time. Stay with me. Let me start with the number that nobody in the mainstream weather conversation is leading with, positive 2.7 degrees Celsius. That is the latest weekly Nino 3.4 index value, centered on August 12, 2026. That is not a model projection. That is not an ensemble mean. That is the observed sea surface temperature anomaly in the central eastern equatorial Pacific, measured and confirmed by NOAA's optimum interpolation sea surface temperature dataset. And that number is still climbing. For the context, consider what the seasonal mean looked like across the spring and early summer. May through July came in at positive 1.51 degrees Celsius. That reading alone would qualify as a strong El Nino event. The July monthly value alone pushed to positive 2.03 degrees, and then the most recent weekly reading crossed positive 2.7. You are watching an event that moved from borderline moderate to fully strong in a matter of weeks, and it has not stopped moving. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center issued their August 13th ENSO diagnostic discussion and assigned greater than 90% probability to a very strong El Nino event persisting through fall and winter 2026 into 2027. That probability was 63% in June. It was 81% in July. Now it is above 90. The probability curve is moving in one direction only, and the rate of movement is itself telling you something about the momentum behind this event. More significantly, NOAA gave the October through December 2026 period a 69% chance of qualifying as a historic event, defined as a 3-month RONI value at or above positive 2.5 degrees Celsius. That threshold would make this event stronger than every El Nino in the observational record going back to 1950. The scientists at Columbia's IRI noted in their August 20-26 quick look that the mid-August objective ENSO outlook points to a sustained exceptionally strong El Nino, with little indication of transition away from El Nino conditions before spring 2027. Spring 2027, that is the timeline you're working with. 76 years of data, and this event has a 69% chance of topping all of them during the October through December window. Before I go further, let me bring you into this properly. My name is Arthur, and this is US Weather Threat. If you are not subscribed yet, do that right now. The coverage I am going to be providing over the next 6 to 8 weeks as this El Nino intensifies and as the fall pattern evolves is going to be some of the most important weather content this channel has ever produced. One button, no cost. Now let us get into what this means for your area starting today. The central and southern plains have been inside this heat for weeks already, and the data from the USDA's weekly weather and crop bulletin tells a story that the national headlines have not fully absorbed. Russell, Kansas set its monthly record high temperature and then did not stop. 4 consecutive daily record highs came in from August 10th through August 13th at 105, 107, 108, and 109 degrees Fahrenheit, all in a 4-day span from one station in central Kansas. Borger, Texas registered back-to-back daily records on August 13th and 14th at 105 and 107 degrees respectively. It was not contained to the plains. Fayetteville, Arkansas logged 5 consecutive daily record highs from August 12th through the 16th, reaching 101, 102, 101 again, and 101 again, and then 104 degrees on August 16th. 5 days in a row, every one a daily record. Joplin, Missouri hit 103 on back-to-back days on August 13th and 14th. Moving into the South Atlantic states, Lumberton, North Carolina, tied its record for August 15th at 99 degrees. Brooksville, Florida, reached 98. These are not isolated spikes. This is a pattern that has been grinding for the better part of a month across a geographic area, stretching from the high plains of Texas and Kansas all the way to the Mid-South and the Gulf Coast. As we move through the final days of August 2026, the GFS is keeping 500 millibar heights locked above normal across the southern plains and central United States through at least August 28th. The European model is in strong agreement on the persistence of that ridge. Surface high pressure is anchoring in place, the atmospheric flow remains too southerly and too warm to introduce meaningful relief, and there is nothing in the immediate model guidance that delivers a pattern break to the deep south or the Gulf Coast states before September. Here is who needs to watch this the most right now. Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Corpus Christi, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Memphis, Little Rock, Jackson, Baton Rouge, and New Orleans. Heat indices across interior South Texas are running at or above 105 degrees. Portions of the lower Mississippi Valley are fighting heat index values near 110. These numbers carry real health consequences for outdoor workers, for people without functional air conditioning, and for anyone who is elderly or managing a chronic medical condition. If you are in those areas, the heat right now is not a nuisance, it is a hazard. Now I want to walk you through the next 7 days with specific dates. August 26th, the ridge maintains its hold. GFS 500 millibar heights remain 2 to 4 standard deviations above normal over the southern plains. Dallas likely reaches 100 to 102 degrees. Houston's heat index approaches 108. No meaningful change from what we have been seeing all month. August 27th, surface high pressure continues to dome from central Kansas through the Texas Hill Country. Afternoon highs in Kansas City in the 93 to 96 range, Tulsa and Little Rock in the mid to upper 90s. Gulf Coast states remain under the heat advisory threshold with indices above 100. August 28th and 29th, the GFS begins to indicate a weak shortwave trough attempting to drop out of Canada toward the northern plains. Here is the critical detail. Both the GFS and the European ensemble agree that this trough is too far north and too shallow to disrupt the core of the heat over the southern tier. What it may do is inject enough instability into the central plains and Midwest to trigger thunderstorm development from Nebraska into Kansas and possibly Missouri by the evening of August 29th. But for Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and the Gulf Coast states, the 28th and 29th bring no relief. August 30th and 31st, this is where the GFS and European model begin to diverge. The GFS suggests a modest weakening of the ridge axis by month's end, possibly allowing temperatures in the northern plains and upper Midwest to relax towards seasonal levels. Minneapolis could reach the low 80s. Chicago might see mid-80s with lower humidity by August 31st. The European ensemble mean, however, keeps the ridge more entrenched over the south-central United States through the end of the month, keeping Wichita, Oklahoma City, and Kansas City in the low to mid-90s even on the last 2 days of August. September 1st and 2nd, this is the inflection point every model is watching. A weak to moderate cold front is likely to push into the northern plains and Great Lakes around September 1st. The critical question is how far south it penetrates. Does it reach Kansas City? Does it make it to St. Louis? Memphis? Right now, the ensemble spread on that front southward extent is wide, and I cannot tell you with confidence that your area gets meaningful relief over Labor Day weekend if you are south of Interstate 70. The northern tier from Minneapolis to Detroit to Buffalo and down into Pittsburgh and Cleveland will likely feel a meaningful temperature drop. For everyone south of that corridor, you are watching a scenario where the front stalls or weakens before reaching you. September the 3rd through 7th, this is the window I'm most focused on and most concerned about. Even if that Labor Day front delivers brief relief to parts of the central United States, both the GFS and European guidance bring the ridge back. The signal for September 5th through 7th shows above normal heights rebuilding over the southern plains. That means any cooling that arrives at the very start of September may last only 3 to 4 days before the heat pattern reasserts itself, and when it rebuilds in the second week of September, El Nino's grip on the subtropical jet will be stronger than it is today, because the Nino 3.4 value will have continued climbing. Drop your city in the comments right now and tell me whether you have had even one full week of real relief since June. I want to see the geographic footprint of this summer from the people who are actually living inside it. Now let me take you to the bigger picture, because this is where everything connects. The fall 20 to 26 atmospheric setup based on both the ECMWF seasonal ensemble and the North American NMME combined model guidance is not behaving like a typical September transition. Researchers published their fall 2026 forecast this week and described the evolving pressure pattern as resembling an El Nino winter atmospheric response that is arriving months ahead of schedule. That early arrival is a direct result of the unusual speed with which this event has intensified. When El Nino reaches the magnitude this one is reaching, the atmosphere responds before the calendar says it should. The NOAA PC official, September through November 2026. Temperature outlook shows above normal conditions favoured across the western United States, the central United States, the Great Lakes corridor, the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, Florida, and the coastal southeastern Gulf areas. I want you to sit with that list for a moment. That is most of the country, and the word favoured does not mean guaranteed. It means the probability is tilted, persistently, structurally tilted, by the thermodynamic engine of a Super El Nino. Let me explain the mechanism in plain language. When the equatorial Pacific warms to this degree, it energizes and extends the subtropical jet stream across the southern tier of the United States. That jet acts as a conveyor belt for warm air and Gulf moisture. It simultaneously suppresses the polar jet from diving deeply southward, which is the mechanism that would normally deliver autumn cold snaps to the central and eastern United States. The result is a full season that runs warm, that runs dry in some regions and wet in others, depending on where the jet tracks, and that turns severe weather events into explosive events when the rare cold intrusion does eventually break through. The IRI data showed the Nino 3.4 index at positive 1.51 for the May through July seasonal mean, with the July monthly value already at positive 2.03, and then the most recent weekly reading at positive 2.7 and climbing. The IRI explicitly stated in their August 2026 quick look that there is little indication of transition away from El Nino before spring 2027. That is a direct quote from their published assessment. The event you are inside right now is not a temporary condition. It is a 6 to 7 month commitment. Now let me go region by region and tell you what this actually means where you live. Southern Plains and Gulf Coast, meaning Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. You're in the highest impact zone for the El Nino heat signal through September and October. The ridge axis, in a very strong to Super El Nino pattern, historically parks to here or just west of the Southern Plains during those months. Individual days in the upper 90s and triple digits for Texas and Oklahoma are not a Labor Day story. They are an October story. Energy demand, drought deepening, wildfire danger across the western portions of Texas and Oklahoma, and the compounding health impact on communities that have been dealing with this since late June are all real concerns that are going to intensify rather than relax over the next 60 days. Midwest and Ohio Valley, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Missouri, Ohio, Kentucky. Your pattern is more variable, but it is not comfortable. You will get shots of cooler air as cold fronts occasionally breach the ridge, but those shots will be brief, 1 to 2 days of relief and then the ridge rebuilds. The emerging risk for your region as September progresses is the severe weather potential that comes with those cold intrusions meeting the still warm, still moist air mass, loaded with Gulf moisture that is sitting over the region. When those air masses collide in the right setup, derecho-type events and severe thunderstorm outbreaks become the outcome. October in an El Nino year across the Midwest is not simply a warm story, it is a stormy story. Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia. The New England states, the temperature outlook shows above normal conditions through most of fall. You're not going to see Phoenix-level extremes, but you will see days in the mid to upper 80s during September that should be in the mid-70s. Humidity will remain elevated longer than the calendar suggests it should, and the subtropical jet enhancement that El Nino provides will keep active storm tracks threading through your region, particularly east of the Appalachians and along the coast. West Coast and Southwest California, Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, Washington. The ridge axis in a Super El Nino parks most strongly over the western United States. The Pacific Northwest had already been dealing with historically low snowpack going into spring 2026, with researchers noting the 2026 western snowpack deficit was associated with warming that made the event roughly 4 times more likely to occur at that magnitude. Now that same region faces an extended warm and dry fall period. NOAA specifically flagged wildfire danger for the Pacific Northwest through early to mid-September in their fall outlook. The soil moisture deficits left by the summer have created conditions where low humidity wind events can become catastrophic rapidly. For Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Phoenix, and the Central Valley of California, September under a very strong El Nino historically runs 8 to 12 degrees above the seasonal average on the hottest days. And this is the detail I want you to carry forward as the season progresses. NOAA's fall 2026 outlook specifically noted that a rapid change to wet conditions from the southern plains to the interior southeast later in fall could lead to flooding potential. That flip from extreme prolonged heat to heavy rainfall events is a documented signature of strong El Nino falls. Communities that have been in 100-degree temperatures for weeks can face flash flooding with very little transition time. Emergency managers in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri need to be thinking about both ends of the spectrum at the same time. Before we wrap up, there is one more thing you need to know, and this is the part I have been building toward: the hurricane season complication. The conventional understanding is that El Nino suppresses Atlantic hurricane activity. It does this by increasing vertical wind shear across the tropical Atlantic and the Caribbean, which prevents the organization and deep convection that tropical systems need to intensify. Historically, that relationship is one of the most robust in tropical meteorology, and it generally holds. 2026 has introduced a complication that is making this season harder to read than any strong El Nino year in recent memory. Atlantic sea surface temperatures, particularly in the Western Caribbean and in the Gulf, are running significantly above the long-term baseline. The warm water anomaly in the Western Atlantic and Gulf Basin is not being suppressed by El Nino, and warm water is fuel. When Tropical Storm Bertha tracked through the Gulf earlier this summer, Lake Charles, Louisiana, was placed simultaneously under a tropical storm warning and an extreme heat warning. That dual threat situation, two completely different hazard types converging on the same community at the same time, represents something that emergency management planning frameworks were not designed around. Even with El Nino shear limiting widespread deep tropics activity across the main development region between Africa and the Lesser Antilles, the Western Caribbean and the Gulf Basin remain thermodynamically primed. Gulf water temperatures are warm enough to support rapid intensification of any system that finds a low shear window. Those windows where El Nino shear momentarily relaxes over the Gulf or Western Caribbean are what I will be checking every morning through October. One disturbance finding one of those windows over water this warm becomes a fundamentally different conversation very quickly. The combination of Super El Nino shear on one hand and anomalously warm Gulf and Western Atlantic temperatures on the other does not fit cleanly into historical analogues. The 1982 and 1997 Super El Nino events, the two closest comparisons in the historical record, occurred over cooler baseline ocean temperatures than we have today. We are in territory where the standard playbook requires adjustment, and I will be transparent with you about where my confidence is high and where it is not as the season evolves. I am not calling for a Gulf hurricane in September. I am telling you the setup I am watching and why it cannot be dismissed with the simple observation that El Nino is present. What is happening in the atmosphere right now is not just a United States story, and I want to give you the global context because it helps explain why the heat in America has been so persistent and why the transition to fall is being delayed. This summer, Europe experienced its fifth heat dome event of the season. The ECMWF and GFS ensemble guidance tracked 500 millibar heights reaching near record or record levels over the Mediterranean, Iberia, France, and Central Europe at various points between June and early August. Temperatures in parts of Spain and Portugal challenged all-time records, with GFS model runs projecting peaks between 44 and 46 degrees Celsius, which is 111 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, in some southern locations. That level of heat is not a European phenomenon in isolation. It is a signal of the same atmospheric pattern amplification that El Nino is driving globally. The ocean heat content across the North Pacific has also been running well above normal. A marine heatwave extending from east of Japan into the North Pacific was already noted by meteorologists this spring, and the elevated Pacific sea surface temperatures contributed to multiple typhoon developments in the Western Pacific this season. Those typhoon tracks and their interactions with the mid-latitude jet stream created pressure wave train effects that propagated across the Pacific and influenced the upper-level ridge structure over North America. It is a chain of connections that spans thousands of miles, but it is real, and it is one of the mechanisms through which El Nino's influence reaches inland to Tulsa and Memphis and Fayetteville. The Copernicus Climate Change Service, the European Union's climate monitoring program, published their fall 2026 seasonal guidance this month and showed temperatures more likely than not to finish above the 80th percentile across nearly the entire continent of Europe for September through November. That signal is the European expression of the same El Nino forcing that is locking heat over the American South. The same global driver, different regional expression, similar outcome. Understanding that this is a planetary scale event, not a regional weather quirk, changes how you think about the timeline. You cannot outweight a planetary scale forcing mechanism by counting down to a date on the calendar. The calendar does not know about El Nino. September 1st is not a reset button. The atmosphere responds to the ocean temperatures, and the ocean temperatures are not going to change by September 1st. I have been studying weather patterns for years, and this is one of the most clearly defined large-scale forcings I have seen set up going into a fall season. The clarity of the signal is both what makes it possible to communicate this far in advance and what makes it sobering to describe. Let me also give you the drought dimension of this story because it connects to the heat, and it will matter going forward. Parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and the Central Plains have been accumulating drought conditions throughout this summer under the persistent ridge. When you run high temperatures for weeks with below normal rainfall, the soil dries out. Dry soil heats more rapidly during the day and retains less moisture overnight. That dryness feeds back into the heat, making extreme temperature days more likely and more intense than they would be over normally moist soils. This is called the soil moisture feedback, and it has been actively amplifying the heat anomalies across the Central Plains through August. As El Nino continues to suppress rainfall over the southern plains and keeps the subtropical jet displaced away from its normal fall position, drought conditions in those areas are likely to deepen further through September and October. The NOAA fall outlook's specific mention of flooding potential later in fall from the southern plains to the interior southeast may seem contradictory alongside a drought discussion, but it reflects how El Nino transitions can work. Prolonged heat and drought followed by a rapid pattern shift to heavy rain when the first significant trough finally does penetrate the ridge. When that rainfall comes, the ground is too dry and too compacted to absorb it efficiently, and flash flooding is the result. If you're in Oklahoma, Arkansas, or Central Texas, I want you to hold both of those scenarios in your mind simultaneously. The heat continuing into September and deepening your drought conditions, and then the possibility that when fall finally does break through, it breaks hard with heavy rainfall on ground that is not ready for it. Both of those things can be true within the same 60-day window. There is one more piece of this I want you to understand before we close tonight. The energy grid is in this story too. The sustained heat through July and August 2026 strained power grids across multiple regions of the United States. Heat-related power outages occurred in waves across the eastern United States during the summer heat dome that pushed 106 degrees in Atlantic City on the 4th of July. The initial heat dome from late June through early July left hundreds of thousands of homes without power at various points. Each multi-day extreme heat event compounds the mechanical stress on transformers, transmission lines, and distribution equipment that is already running near capacity during afternoon peak demand hours. As we move into September, with temperatures likely to remain well above normal across the south central and southeast United States, the grid stress story does not end. September heat in Oklahoma City, in Dallas, in Memphis, in New Orleans is not as severe in terms of peak temperatures as July heat, but it is heat that arrives after a summer of sustained stress on equipment and on the human beings operating and maintaining that equipment. The risk of localized outages on individual high heat days in September should not be dismissed, and anyone in those regions should have a power outage contingency plan in place, particularly for households with vulnerable individuals. This is the totality of what the data is showing for the period ahead. Persistent heat across the south central and southeastern United States through September, driven by a Super El Nino that is not weakening, a weak cold front at Labor Day that may not deliver meaningful relief south of Interstate 70, a ridge rebuilding signal in the September 5th through 7th window, drought conditions deepening across the plains, fire danger elevated across the Pacific Northwest, Gulf and Western Atlantic that remain thermodynamically capable despite El Nino shear, and a full seasonal outlook that tilts above normal temperatures across most of the country through November. This is a complex pattern in a complex season. I will be here every day breaking it down as new model runs come in and as new data points arrive from NOAA, from the NWS, from the Climate Prediction Center, and from the IRI. One more thing I want to address directly, because I get asked about it every time we have a prolonged heat event. How does this compare to historical summers? The 2024 North American heatwaves, for reference, ran from March through September of that year and recorded a peak temperature of 129 degrees Fahrenheit at Furnace Creek in Death Valley on July 7th. The heat-related death toll in the United States alone from that season reached over 1,000. The 2022 North American heatwaves produced $9.3 billion in damages. June of 2022 saw Minneapolis hit 101 degrees on June 20th, setting a daily record. Washington, D.C. hit 104 degrees in July of 2024, the highest reading there since 2012. What we are seeing in 2026 is not happening in a vacuum. It is happening against a backdrop of summers that have been consistently warmer than the historical baseline, each one establishing a new reference point for what a heat event looks like. and it is the first time any of those recent summers has coincided with a strengthening El Nino of this potential magnitude arriving simultaneously. The combination of a warming baseline and a Super El Nino is what makes the data I showed you tonight matter, at a level that goes beyond a typical summer forecast. This is not a temporary disruption. This is the new shape of late summer and early fall in the central and southern United States, amplified this year by a specific and measurable atmospheric driver that the data says is going to persist for months. I want you to be prepared. I want you to understand why the heat is not breaking. And I want you to be watching this channel because the information I am going to provide over the next 60 days is going to matter for decisions that affect your safety, your family, and your community. Here is what the entire picture adds up to. The heat that has gripped the United States from late June through all of August 2026 was not a random weather event. It was the opening act of a Super El Nino that the data indicates is still strengthening. The Nino 3.4 index stood at positive 2.7 as of mid-August, and the model plume consensus is for continued upward movement through the fall. NOAA now puts the probability of the October through December period qualifying as a historic record-setting event at 69%, up from near zero just 4 months ago. The atmosphere that produced 109 degrees in Russell, Kansas, 5 consecutive daily record highs in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and a simultaneous tropical storm and extreme heat warning in Lake Charles, Louisiana, is not being replaced by a refreshing September. It is being reinforced by the strongest equatorial Pacific warming in at least 76 years, and according to both NOAA and the IRI, that forcing has no indication of weakening before spring 2027. September is next. October is behind it. If you live anywhere in the regions I described tonight, the data asks you to plan around warmth as the default and relief as the exception, not the other way around. If this breakdown helped you understand something about the season ahead that you did not fully see before, share it. The people who need this information most are often the least likely to encounter it. They are working outside in Oklahoma City and San Antonio. They are managing health conditions in Memphis and Baton Rouge. They are in communities along the Gulf Coast that have been under heat advisories since the last week of June. They deserve to know what the data actually says. Tomorrow I'll be watching 2 things very closely. The southward extent of the Labor Day front as it drops into the northern plains, and the latest GFS and European model runs for the September 5th through 10th period. That second window is the one that tells us whether September is going to look like a slow, grudging transition, or whether it is going to look like August with a different name on the calendar. Subscribe if you are not already here, hit the like button if this data was useful, and drop your city below. This heat refused to break all of August, and the data says September is next.